Salutations, respected viewers. I am George from Ireland, and here I am outside the Earl of Eldon's house in London on Bedford Square. So the Earl of Eldon, or is it Eldon, he was a very distinguished jurist of the early 19th century, but he was also a real bugbear of reformers and radicals. So he was born in Newcastle in 1751. His father was a highly prosperous coal merchant. He went to Royal Grammar School in Newcastle, which was widely regarded as the most distinguished school in that city. You might not know that Newcastle upon Tyne is in the northeast corner of England, was famous for coal production, and they were saying don't take coals to Newcastle, as in that would be pointless because they've got so much coal there. So he went to University College, Oxford. So Oxford University was then divided into about 20 colleges, sort of a federal system. His brother was also there at the same time, and you didn't study a subject as such. They would do pick and mix, but a lot of it was classics. You know, Latin and ancient Greek, history, the scientific subjects on maths would be through Latin and Greek as well. He had a fairly distinguished career there, graduated, had thought about seeking ordination in the Church of England, but instead was called to the bar and came to London. His legal career prospered here, so spent almost all his time in London from there on. Was a Tory of the most old-fashioned school, was a judge, and had not the least qualm or hesitation about sentencing people to be hanged for a grand larceny, which is stealing money stealing anything worth more than a few shillings. Was it 5 shillings? So life was cheap, as you can tell. But anyway, he was eventually made Lord Chancellor, as in the most senior judge in the land. He's part of the cabinet, he's part of the judiciary, and he's part of the House of Lords. So he's in all three branches of government. So the separation of powers in the United Kingdom wasn't complete, not until really the noughties under Tony Blair finally sorted it out. Anyway, so he was a Tory and an out-and-out reactionary. And indeed, he was very firm in enforcing the law against sedition. And he was also a friend of Lord Melville, who was a man who was cut from the same cloth in Scotland. So the Earl of Eldon, one time, when he was sending somebody down for treason of some kind, conspiring to overthrow the state, he said that you attempted to effect representative government, which is the opposite of the sort of government we have in this country. He wanted very unrepresentative government, that the landed classes to dominate the landed gentry and the nobility and so forth. Despite the fact he came from a mercantile family, he had not the least doubt that the wealthy ought to have almost exclusive political power. So that was that. He'd now be seen as a hate figure, a real villain by most people these days. His views were considered quite revolting. But anyway, he obviously gained preferment and a great deal of money, and there's a huge statue of him and his brother, which was supposed to be put up in the mid-19th century. I can't remember where it was going to be, St Paul's Cathedral or something like that, but they wouldn't accept it. So eventually a member of the family said to Univ, his old college, my college, I'll tell you what, if you agree to display this in your college, I'll pay for a new library. And so it was done. So there's a gigantic statue of himself and his brother, the two Scott brothers, there in University College, Oxford Library. And obviously it was meant to be outside very high up, so it's much larger than life. You can sit on it. And indeed in Univ to this day, there's the Earl of Eldon Society for law undergraduates and the postgraduates. And is it Gorsuch, one of the current judges on the Supreme Court of the United States? He was a member of it when I was there, when it was about 2004. What else? Oh yeah, and he gains a dishonourable mention in The Mask of Anarchy by Percy Bysshe Shelley, one of his nemeses, who was a radical, not a politician exactly, someone who composed poesy for the advancement of the cause of reform. Said Eldon big ears had on, because you may know that poem, which was a literary response to the Peterloo massacre in 1819. As I lay asleep in Italy, there came from over the sea a voice, and it forth led me to walk in visions of poesy. I met murder on the way. He had a mask like Castlereagh. Eldon big ears had on, Sidmouth and a crocodile rode by. Many more destructions played in that ghastly masquerade, and so forth. It goes on. So he absolutely abominated Eldon because the law on sedition had been broadened and strengthened. So proposing significant reform of the Constitution was regarded as seditious, and a seditionist could well be sentenced to transportation to Australia and things like that. It was a time of the Napoleonic Wars, just after the French Revolution. Radicalism was in the air. People thought the United Kingdom was in a pre-revolutionary stage, which didn't. The risk of this didn't really abate till after the Great Reform Act of 1832, and he died not too long after that. So that was him. You can see the fruits of his labour. This enormous house, now owned by New York University, which is their base in London, and one of the noblest squares in Londinium. Well, thank you for all your support on Patreon, on PayPal and so forth. So please book lessons with me in English, history, geography, religious studies, politics, anything like that. English as a foreign language, and get me to translate from French, Spanish, Italian, Romanian, German and Russian. I edit documents, I help people with their coursework and theses, dissertations and so forth. Tutor people for GCSEs, A-level, IB, Common Entrance, 7+, anything. So please follow me on everything. Goodbye.